Hello, guten Tag, willkommen. Hi, Oliver Gardner here for you, the Organic Consumers Association. First of all, pick up your phone and look at it. Dial 97779 and text BYTES to get the latest news on organic farming and organic lifestyle. And also you can follow us on Twitter at Organic Consumers, and also sign up to our newsletter on Organic Consumers. So willkommen, why willkommen? Because we are here in Germany, in Bonn, for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's the conference of all parties. And I'm here with Shefali Sharma. Hello.
Hi, I'm Shefali Sharma with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy.
So the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy are launching a very important report today.
Yeah, so IATP, along with Grain and the Heinrich Böll Foundation, have just launched these series of infographics. And it's the first of its kind, which is basically talking about how there's a set of corporations that have been completely ignored in this debate. We've heard about the fossil fuel lobby. We know about Exxon, Shell, and BP as the major carbon emitters in the corporate sector. But what we don't know about are corporations like JBS, Tyson, Cargill. For instance, how many people even know that JBS is the largest meat producer on this planet, moving large amounts of meat across this globe, and also contributing to large amounts of emissions. So, for instance, on our graphic here, the top 20 meat and dairy corporations actually emit more than Germany does. And Germany is quite a significant emitter. If these 20 were a country, they would be the 7th largest emitter in the world. And the top 5 meat and dairy companies combined actually emit more than Exxon, more than Shell, and BP. And I think this is really important to understand because we think of meat and dairy as really important for our diets, which is true. But what kind of model of production are we talking about? Are we talking about the small producers? Are we talking about pastoralists that are in Africa and in many parts of the global south? Or are we talking about the mass production of confined animals and the mass transport of live animals across borders for exports, cheap exports, where the environmental, the public health footprint of this production actually is completely ignored. And in the last couple of years, it's striking, as Brazil's exports have gone up of meat, as JBS has profited, we've seen deforestation, the rate of deforestation in Brazil, which it's so proud of reducing over the years, has actually increased. Now, of course, it's not all attributed to the meat industry, but the meat industry is a part of that. And in fact, IATP is going to be coming out with a report at the end of this month, November 30th, on these top meat producers in Brazil and the support that they got from the Brazilian Development Bank. But that's not to say it's all Brazil, right? I mean, when you look at this list of 20, you've got Tyson, which is in the United States, Cargill, which is in the United States, Dairy Farmers of America, which is in the United States, Fonterra, which is New Zealand. And I mean, half of New Zealand's emissions come from Fonterra, basically. So we really need to disaggregate this whole idea around, especially around livestock, where they talk about producers, but they don't talk about the corporate sector. And so that's the aim of our report. I also want to flash this particular graphic here. It's a lot harder to see, but I'm sure that you will provide a link to our website with these reports that can be downloaded in English, German, French, Spanish. But basically what this middle graph shows is the pink and the green lines are the path that we need to be on. We need to dramatically reduce our emissions from the 51 gigatons that we emit as the planet today, dramatically down to about 23 to 13 gigatons. And if we continue to ignore the rate at which we're producing meat and dairy, then the budget that we have, the carbon budget that we have, will almost entirely be taken up by meat and dairy should we do nothing about it by 2050. So when you look at it, in the 2-degree scenario, if we want to keep global warming below 2 degrees, nearly half of the carbon budget is taken up by meat and dairy if we continue with business as usual. And in the 1.5-degree scenario, it's 81%. So this is very serious, and this is where associations like yours can play a very, very critical role. Because in this last page, we actually talk about the solutions. The solutions exist. We just lack the political will amongst governments to actually do the right thing.
So yeah, here we are. So redirect, reinvest, regulate, reduce, and regenerate.
Mm-hmm.
So we really like to talk about regeneration, regenerative forms of agriculture. But before we get into the solutions, I'd like to ask you, what actually pushed you to look into this? I mean, isn't there already governing bodies that are regulating corporations on their emissions? And don't actually companies have to report on the emissions that they're emitting?
Well, this is really tricky. No government has to date actually had any enforceable regulations on the type of emissions that these corporations emit, right? Nitrous oxide and methane. And in fact, California State is the first government to actually have a scheme and a target on methane. And in fact, IATP has also been covering what's happening in California. They for instance, in 2016, California has a cap-and-trade program, and really they allocated $50 million to try to deal with methane, methane related to agriculture, in that program, where they gave $50 million to try to do something about it. And nearly 35 million of that went to big dairies for biodigesters. And so what you're getting, rather than actually regulating them, is incentives to actually continue to expand their production.
So
right?
biodigesters that produce biogas.
Biogas.
Which is considered as a renewable energy.
Exactly. Well, this is the other thing. There's a bill now in California which is trying to classify, well, they want to expand their portfolio of renewable energy. And they want to consider this mega dairy gas as clean natural gas. And of course we have a serious problem with that. How can you have such a polluting industry that creates health problems, that has significant implications for soil, air, and water pollution, to be a clean natural gas? And so what we want is for those funds to go to more regenerative manure management practices, and help these mega dairies transition towards that, rather than to help incentivize them.
So what actually, just to inform our viewers, what create the emissions in the first place? So we know that, for instance, with a corporation such as GBS in Brazil, we can easily imagine that the emissions come from deforestation. But what are the other sources of emissions?
Well, yes, deforestation is one, but it's also just when we're talking about these corporations, and it's just the sheer number of animals that they are turning into meat, right? Or taking out or making dairy products out of. It's the sheer number that we're talking about, and the manure that they generate that leads to the methane that's highly problematic, and the nitrous oxide that is related to these manure lagoons. So in the United States, for instance, where you have confined facilities, where you have so many cows or beef cattle in one area, and you have these huge manure lagoons, That's such a huge source of methane and nitrous oxides that leads to the emissions that we're talking about. And then there's, of course, the feed footprint, right? You have massive monocultures of soy and corn fields, and that the fertilizer that goes into it, the transport, everything involved in that, including land degradation, that all contributes to this.
So it's degrading land, it's degrading soils, therefore it's affecting fauna, it's affecting biodiversity, but it's also affecting water, rainwater. As we know, rainwater is filtered by soils and they end up in rivers. So the pollution also ends up in the waterways, and finally in the oceans, where we have a problem now with we're getting these dead zones off our coasts. Exactly. So this really goes to show the attitude of these corporations, because they know what they're doing. They know the impact that they have.
Well, I think they would say that, they're feeding the world, that they are providing a very key source of protein. And to that we would say, the bulk of meat and dairy produced in this world is actually produced by small producers, and it's produced for local markets. The fact is that these corporations are dismantling these markets, and their presence is so strong, and it's oligopolistic actually, so in the sense that they control the prices that are paid to producers, and really shape the market dramatically. And this is what so in terms of food security, you've started to see the countries that we're talking about that are really major producers are the United States, Europe, Brazil, China, and India, and what you've started to see is overconsumption. And I mean, in Europe and in the United States and Brazil, the per capita consumption of meat is way over what the healthy levels are recommended by the World Health Organization. And so what we're saying, and in China, you've started to see an obesity crisis amongst the middle class and upper middle class, and the same thing in India. The poor don't even, at least in India, the poor don't even get fruit, much less meat, right? So it's not about food security. It's not about feeding the poor. It's not about feeding the world. It's actually about getting a grip about our own personal footprint for those of us who overconsume this, and to understand that the marketing generated by these companies and everything else is actually creating a false narrative. And so a part of our effort is to actually bring forth a new narrative that reflects more the reality of what we're facing.
Well, thank you very much. One last question. JBS has made quite a lot of news lately that we were talking about earlier on. Could you tell us a little bit more about the actions that are happening in justice at the moment against this corporation?
Well, JBS's two CEOs are actually in jail in Brazil at the moment. They have been tried and proven guilty of bribing over 900 politicians in Brazil, and including 3 presidents of Brazil in different terms. And it's pretty significant because, as I mentioned earlier, I think much of when JBS exploded into the global scene, they were backed by the Brazilian Development Bank. And the Brazilian Development Bank still owns shares in JBS, and that's very significant. So that means it's Brazilian taxpayers and the Brazilian people who paid for the greed of the leadership of this corporation. And it's one of the biggest fines, I think, that the independent prosecutor in Brazil has slapped on a corporation in a case like this. So it's pretty significant. And in the spring of this year, there was this what the media called Operation Weak Flesh, which was JBS and other meat companies like BRF and Marfrig and Minerva, these are all Brazilian companies, had been bribing officials to allow tainted meat to be exported. So it resulted in actually import bans for some time in China and in the European Union and other places, which had since been removed.
So for those that don't know, what is tainted meat?
Well, I guess tainted meat is meat that was rotting, that then was doused with certain kind of chemicals to remove the odor, or with cardboard or flour or other things to make it seem intact. It's pretty disgusting, actually. Yeah.
That just goes to show their attitude, doesn't it? I think we're going to wrap up the interview now. Thank you so much for your time. Where can we find the report online?
Thank you. I appreciate the time. You can find the report at grain.org and at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, IATP.org.
Thank you very much. That was Shefali Sharma from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. I'm Oliver Gardner. We're here at the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Bonn. So we're going to sign out. Thank you very much for following us. Please pick up your phone if you haven't already. You can text at 97779, text BYTES. You can sign up to our newsletter for more news on organic farming and organic lifestyle at organicconsumers.org, or follow us on our Twitter at organicconsumer. Thank you.